السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. halkan waa Pitch Media. waxaad moodaa in warbaahinta caalamku ay imika u soo jeesatay guud ahaan isbarbardhigga dalalkii la isku oran jiray Soomaaliya, gaar ahaana Somaliland iyo Soomaaliya, iyo qaababka haykalka dowladnimadu iyo hanaanka doorashooyinka iyo guud ahaan habka haykalka maamulka iyo dhismaha dowladnimo iyo qaabka caalamku markaasi taageerada buuxda uga geystay dalkaasi Soomaaliya oo ay noqdeen meesha ay markaasi dhaqaalaha dunida oo dhammi ay ku shubantay, halka Somaliland ay noqotay wax faraguudkooda mararka baahiyaha gaarka ay jiraan inay caalamku had iyo jeer kaalin ka qaataan ama qaadaan wadaag ay la yeeshaan. wariyahan la yidhaahdo Fredo Rokwall oo baryahan baqaada dhigayay isbarbardhigga kala duwan iyo hanaankii geedi socodka sooyaalka taariikhda Jamhuuriyadda Somaliland ayaan halkan idinku soo bandhigaynaa bal qaybihiisii qayb ka mid ah, annagoo qaybta saddexaadna mar dhow idiin soo gudbin doona daawasho wanaagsan. halkani waa Pitch Media. Wassalaamu calaykum waraxmatullaahi tacaala wabarakaatu.
In the autumn of 2020, the internationally recognized Federal Republic of Somalia and the government of the totally unrecognized breakaway Republic of Somaliland both plan to hold national elections during the first half of 2021. Only one of these two governments actually followed through, and it wasn't the internationally recognized one. Yes, Somaliland, a country which no one recognizes, held a nationwide vote which was not only a democratic triumph for the people of Somaliland, I would say it was a genuine triumph for democracy in general. Let's take a look at what happened, both Somaliland's successful election and Somalia's disastrous failure to hold one so far. According to the international establishment, the Federal Republic of Somalia controls this territory, but in reality it does not rule this northwest region. This is the self-declared Republic of Somaliland, which, despite being recognized by no other country, has gradually built itself into a relatively peaceful, prosperous, and democratic state since breaking away from Somalia over 30 years ago. So let's start with the election in Somalia, the one which hasn't happened yet. The current president is one Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed. Here are some interesting facts about him. He is almost universally known by the nickname Farmajo, so much that he is often referred to as President Farmajo in the international media. Farmajo is the Somali word for cheese. Supposedly, he liked to eat a lot of cheese as a child, and Farmajo is his family nickname. So, if you want to know who the big cheese is in Somalia, it's Farmajo. While working for the Somali Foreign Ministry during the mid-1980s, Farmajo got a gig working at the Somali Embassy in Washington, D.C. When the dictatorial regime which had run Somalia for decades fell apart in the early 1990s, Farmajo stayed in America and moved to Buffalo, New York, eventually becoming a U.S. citizen. He even registered to vote as a Republican. He later returned to Somalia and in 2010 was appointed Prime Minister, an office which he held for about 8 months. Years later, in February 2017, Farmajo was elected president by a vote of the Somali parliament, not a vote of the Somali people as in a proper election. More on this to come. This was for a 4-year term, which should have, in theory, ended in February 2021. Somalia has not held a normal one-person, one-vote national election for decades, but one of Farmajo's election promises was to hold one when his first term of office was up this year in 2021. He even signed legislation which would make this process possible. But in September 2020, citing a lack of money and infrastructure, the plan to hold a real election was scrapped. Instead, along with several regional leaders, Farmajo hammered out a deal so that the next presidential election would, again, take place via a vote in parliament. Just on its face, that's far from ideal in terms of democratic legitimacy, but it's actually even worse than it sounds. Somalia's parliament isn't democratically elected. It's chosen by a delegation of clan leaders. So in terms of fostering democratic institutions, the bar for Somalia's 2021 election was being set extremely low. But even this extremely limited form of democracy appears to have been too much for Farmajo. Throughout late 2020, he was repeatedly and widely accused of interfering with the electoral process, and stacking Somalia's electoral commission with his cronies. Public trust in the process broke down, and in November 2020, 14 opposition presidential candidates formed a union, something I've never seen before, which they called the Council of Presidential Candidates. They elected a chairman, former Somali President Sharif Sheikh Ahmed, who is only one of 2 former presidents who belong to this group. The next month, in December 2020, there were repeated demonstrations on the streets of the Somali capital, Mogadishu, held to protest against Farmajo's interference in the electoral process. These protests were met by armed attacks from government forces. Former President Ahmed denounced the violence, saying, "The rule of law must be protected, and the government should always respect the rights and freedoms of the people." On February 8, 2021, 4 years to the day that Farmajo became president, and with no new election in sight, the Council of Presidential Candidates issued a statement saying they no longer recognize Farmajo as president. Tensions rose, and over the following weeks, government troops reportedly attacked several buildings where various opposition candidates, including former President Ahmed, were known to be staying. Government troops were also accused of arbitrarily detaining journalists and confiscating their equipment. But still, Farmajo refused to set a new election date. Then, on April 14, 2021, the lower house of the Somali parliament passed a bill extending Farmajo's term of office by 2 years. And Farmajo, of course, signed it into law. But this was a problem. To be legitimate, the law also needed to be passed by the upper house, the Senate. But presumably fearing it would not pass, this law was never presented to them to vote on. Outraged, units of the Somali National Army, mostly from nearby Hirshabelle state, rebelled and swarmed into Mogadishu in late April, seizing control of several neighborhoods on the northern side of town. Government forces resisted, but eventually retreated to the area around the Somali equivalent of the White House, a building known as Villa Somalia. After 2 weeks of tension, the withdrawal of the mutinous troops was negotiated, and the government reasserted control over the capital. Things have been in limbo ever since, until just a few days ago. On May 27, 2021, Farmajo and the leaders of 5 of Somalia's regional states came to yet another agreement. A new parliament was to be elected within 60 days, which would in turn elect a new president. Basically, this is pretty much the same agreement that had been reached in September, the one which then broke down almost immediately. It's still far from perfect. This parliament, like the one which preceded it, will not be democratically elected. It will be selected by a delegation of traditional clan leaders, as all of Somalia's recent parliaments have been. Will this deal work? I'm not holding my breath. But maybe it will. I hope it will. The Somali people deserve better than they are getting from their leaders at the moment. Just a few days after Somalia's elites agreed to yet another dubious compromise, the unrecognized breakaway Republic of Somaliland held its own national election for parliament. And unlike in Somalia, Somaliland's elections are not limited to tribal elders. In fact, for this election, everyone was eligible to vote from the age of 15 and up. Now, Somaliland's political system has a few unusual features, which I cover in detail in another video, but here are the basics. Only 3 parties are allowed to compete at the national level for parliamentary and presidential elections. This prevents politics from fracturing along the dozens of clan and sub-clan lines. Somaliland's parliament also has an unelected chamber, the House of Elders, or Gurtida, which, as the name suggests, is made up of clan elders. But the Gurtida's powers are limited, and, like the House of Lords in the UK, it is mostly a revising chamber. Much more substantial power rests with the democratically elected House of Representatives and the President. Somaliland adopted its current constitution following a nationwide referendum in 2001, and since then, the people have directly elected 3 different presidents. After each election, power has peacefully transferred from one president to the next, something no country can take for granted. Unlike Somalia, Somaliland has spent the past 3 decades in relative peace. And I mean relative. There have been border skirmishes with the nearby Somali state of Puntland. And despite the lack of formal diplomatic recognition, Somaliland has managed to grow its economy and foster a relatively stable and prosperous society. In general, things have been good, and there's been a lot of progress. But there has been one major blot on Somaliland's copybook for some time. There has been no new election for the House of Representatives, the democratically elected part of Parliament, since 2005. The reasons for this are complicated. The Horn of Africa, the region where Somaliland is located, is a tough neighborhood, and even though Somaliland has managed to avoid the fighting, which has engulfed several of its neighbors, it has still had to contend with droughts, locusts, a lack of foreign aid, one of the major downsides to being an unrecognized republic, and of course the coronavirus pandemic. One of the more important powers of Somaliland's unelected chamber, the Gortida, is to extend the terms of office for the president and members of the House of Representatives in times of crisis. And when it comes to the House of Representative elections, which are complicated and expensive to run, the Gortida has repeatedly postponed these for various reasons, sometimes for totally legitimate reasons. But by 2021, Somaliland's parliament had not had to face the voters for over 15 years, and that was becoming a problem. So, holding new elections for the House of Representatives became a priority. As one official from the Kulmiya party, the party of the current Somaliland president, put it, "I cannot tell you how important these elections are. We will be the sunshine of the Horn of Africa if we have successful polls." So, did these elections happen? Yes, they did. Just as planned, on Monday, the 31st of May. I followed it all day on Twitter as it was happening, and I have to say, it was a really inspirational thing to watch unfold. Here are some examples of what I mean. Tweets of Somalilanders standing in long queues to vote were common, as this one said, "The only time you can get Somalilanders to queue is on election day. It's so incredible and emotional that this small, unrecognized nation is keeping the light of democracy in the Horn alive." This tweet shared a photo of Vice President Abdirahim Salisi voting, saying, "The young lady verifying Vice President's voter card in Borame was all about business. No special treatment whatsoever. This is the result of growing up in a free and fair environment." Here's a tweet which is a particular favorite. It says, "After standing in line for 5 hours under the burning sun, I'm proud to say I cast my vote for the first time, and I voted for a woman." And she's holding up the ink stain on her finger, the Somaliland equivalent to an "I voted" sticker. Zito Mwame Riyagwe Kabwe, an opposition politician from Tanzania who was acting as an election observer, tweeted, "I am so moved by Somaliland, the people, unrecognized, but so proud of their motherland. They don't care what the world thinks. They do better elections than Tanzania, than Uganda, than Nigeria. So poor, but brave to face their challenges. The future is here." Later, Mr. Kabwe tweeted perhaps the most moving image of the entire election. This old man was brought by his son to vote at Tulada Dara Godle Station, a village out of Berbera City. He is sick and was on a drip at the health center. I asked, why bother? The answer? Maybe I won't be alive in coming days, but I want the world to know my country is a democracy. I could go on. There were hundreds of similar tweets. But as we've recently seen in America, what happens immediately after an election is just as important for upholding democracy as the election itself. Somaliland's electoral authorities began releasing initial results about 36 hours after polls closed. In addition to the 82 House of Representatives seats, there were votes from 220 local council elections to count as well. So this was a massive undertaking. It took about a week, but we now have the preliminary results for the new House of Representatives. It's a pretty even split, and the seat allocations between parties have not significantly shifted. The opposition Wadani party has 31 seats. The ruling Kulmiya party, ruling because the president is from this party, has 30 seats, up 2 from the 2005 election. And the third party, Ubud, has 28 seats, the same number it won in 2005. Somaliland's parties tend not to be massively different from each other ideologically, although Wadani does tend to be more socially progressive. But basically, in party terms, the election has returned a status quo result. It would be wrong to say Somaliland's elections were perfect. They really weren't. 13 women ran for seats in the House of Representatives, including the one featured in the tweet I read earlier, but none were elected. This is actually a backward step from the 2005 poll, when, although fewer women ran, one did win a seat. There were also reports of journalists being detained, and 5 opposition candidates were arrested. But despite the significant areas for needed improvement, there was also a huge amount of progress to celebrate. For the first time in Somaliland's history, this election was watched by international observers, including former Sierra Leone President Ernest Bai Koroma, who called them free, peaceful, and credible. Over 1 million Somaliland citizens were successfully registered to vote, and they cast their ballots at over 2,700 polling stations. This was an incredible undertaking, and the fact that the $21.8 million it cost to run these elections was 70% paid for by the Somaliland government, and remember, this is one of the poorest countries in the world, it's a huge statement about how seriously they take their institutions of democracy. So, what to say about these 2 elections? The one that happened, and the one that hasn't. Not yet. Maybe it will. First of all, the people of Somalia are not to blame for the way their leaders have let them down. I've never been to Somalia or Somaliland, but I've traveled extensively throughout the rest of the Horn of Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti, and I've met lots of wonderful Somali people in these countries. I've drank chai with them, chewed chat with them, they're great, and given the chance, I have no doubt they would embrace true democracy as fervently as the people of Somaliland have. The problems facing Somalia are complex, but they are being exacerbated, rather than helped, by President Farmaajo's effort to subvert democratic elections and cling on to power. I mean, I know you're a Republican, but you don't have to behave like Donald Trump, really. President Farmaajo, hold an election. If you lose, step down. You'll be remembered in history as a good president. As for Somaliland, its democracy still has a long way to go, but it's come so far. What Somaliland is building, almost completely on its own, with little outside help, is an example not just for the Horn of Africa, or even an example for the rest of Africa. It's an important example for the entire world. So, as someone who is very worried about the democratic institutions in my home country, I wanted to say to Somaliland, thank you. Keep going, and hopefully someday the international establishment will recognize you as a fully independent and sovereign country, and you can take your place as a full member of the family of nations. You deserve it. Thanks for watching. So I'm curious to find out how much you guys knew about either of these elections, the one that happened and the one that didn't. Let me know in the comments. And I'd love it if you could give this video a like, just so more people will see it. That would be great. And I'll see you in the next video.